Hello and welcome to this lecture. We are continuing from what we've been trying to do through the week, that is to give you a broad sense of sociological theory as it emerges, what its preconditions were, and who were the thinkers that influenced the development of sociological theory or social theory. So today's lecture is also in that domain. What I'm trying to do today is present a genealogy of ideas in the canon. So two terms I just introduced in this one sentence. One is genealogy and one is canon. By genealogy in this lecture, I am referring to the lineage, or in some ways the family tree of ideas that we are talking about. So when Marx is writing, who are the people he is referring to, that he is engaging with in his texts? When Weber is writing, what influences have shaped his thought and his ideas? So that's something that we will look at today for primarily what constitutes as the canon of classical sociology or sociological theory. Mainly the three thinkers, Marx, Karl Marx, Max Weber and Emil Durkheim, are considered as the three founding canonical thinkers of sociological theory, and how their ideas are shaped is what the lecture is about. Now a canon, the other term that I introduced today, refers to the set of foundational texts that those in a discipline consider as essential readings for anyone else interested in knowing or learning that particular discipline. And it's a very interesting term, but it also is restrictive. So who are the people who considered certain texts important or certain authors important? What kind of power hierarchies or geographies and histories shaped the construction of the canon is something that sociological thinkers would be very interested in contemporary times. And so while today I will present broadly the influences on the three major thinkers, I also include a few others of their time, and I start off with an Arab thinker who predates many of those that I am talking about today, and I end today's class with what is happening in Indian sociology. There are several others who haven't made it to the canon but are significant thinkers, such as W.E.B. Du Bois and several feminist thinkers that don't quite make it to the canon, but we will focus on those thinkers later on in the course. But for today, we rely on primarily focusing on what is considered the canon, except for the beginning and the end of the lecture, where, like I said, I introduce Ibn Khaldun, the Arab thinker, and I end with Indian sociology and how it develops for our context. All right, so Ibn Khaldun was a North African scholar in the 14th century, somebody who actually developed a very methodical study of the social change of his times. And he this one book, he also wrote a very detailed autobiography which tells us about his journey. But today I am going to be referring to one of his texts called Muqaddimah, which the subtext of it is an introduction to history. And the way Ibn Khaldun talks about history, he is basically not just narrating the facts that he observes, but he is making inferences about the nature of society, about the form of society, and about social change using a comparative method. So he is studying nomadic tribes of his times, largely the Bedouin tribes of northern Africa, but he is also studying the emerging and very vibrant cities in Egypt and in southern Spain. And in that comparison, through that comparison, he is talking about a sort of evolutionary or a cyclical process of how societies transform. One word I think that is quite associated with him is Asibeya, which largely refers to social solidarity, social cohesion, social glue that holds society together. And he observes that in nomadic tribes, the social glue that holds the community or the social together is very, very strong. And it is, and this social cohesion is what enables these nomadic tribes to defend against those outside the tribe or other threats, to also manage food for everyone in the tribe, but this allows the tribe also to grow, and as the tribe grows and expands, at some point it settles, and then that settling becomes more and more complex in terms of size and in terms of the division of labor. And he documents that various artisans and crafts emerge as the urban is consolidated, and at some point these become there are items of luxury that and immense wealth that is possible because of this settling in the urban. At this juncture, he writes that there is too much emphasis on the accumulation of wealth and on acquiring and partaking of luxuries, especially by the wealthy classes, which leads them to not pay as much attention to the welfare of those that they are responsible for, and thereby eventually leading to a degeneration and perhaps a dissolution of that particular society, and the cycle starts all over again. Very, very insightful in terms of both the methodological innovations that he makes, because his texts are based on observation. He uses a comparative analysis, and he comes up with a sort of an evolutionary way of looking at society, which we will see in the other authors also, that such a thinking is very much a central component of the way sociological theory has progressed. So I'm going to start with the French sociological tradition, and variously I will speak about the French sociological tradition, the German sociological tradition, and the English sociological tradition. I will refer very briefly to some of these influences and how they shape the American sociological tradition, but I'm not going in too much of depth over there. We'll do that in subsequent lectures. We've already spoken about the French Revolution. We've spoken about the immense kind of disorder that came with it, an upheaval of the established patterns that came with the French revolutions, along with ideas of liberty and equality and fraternity, and the removal of the feudal system. So I start with Alexis Tocqueville, who was very influenced by Montesquieu, and Tocqueville is influenced by several ideas from Montesquieu, in the sense that he's kind of stands apart in the sense that some of the other scholars that I will introduce in the French sociological tradition are drawing from Comte's work, whereas and Saint-Simon's work, but Tocqueville stands a little bit apart. Now, French sociological theory has a very interesting and somewhat of a fraught relationship with Enlightenment theorists and Enlightenment thinkers, except for perhaps Tocqueville, who is very much drawing from Enlightenment thinkers such as Montesquieu. Montesquieu is known for writing about the separation of powers in government, and Tocqueville I spoke briefly about in one of my previous lectures, wrote extensively about democracy in America, so he's also following a comparative method. He has a very interesting take at Enlightenment thinkers. While he is very much a proponent of the need for human freedom, he has contradictory views about the notion of equality. And for him, equality is basically leading to more mediocrity as compared to the high crafts and intellectual development associated with the aristocrats. And more than that, he fears that equality can lead to a consolidation and centralization of government, which he says is very tricky because that can lead to a loss of freedom, and therefore the whole purpose of giving equality gets lost. He also writes about equality leading to, at that point he terms individualism, and with the rising individualism, he says there is less concern about the larger well-being of society, and therefore equality is not something that he prescribes. Now, these ideas later on the notion of freedom, on the role of government, on equality and the related governmental centralization leading to loss of freedom. These are some ideas that at a later date Weber, perhaps with his study on bureaucracy, takes up, and we will also see that in Michel Foucault's work on governmentality, what this does. Alongside this tradition in French sociological thought, there is a parallel tradition, and this one is coming from Saint-Simon. These thinkers, Saint-Simon heavily influenced and was the teacher for Auguste Comte, who is a great influence on Émile Durkheim. Now, these thinkers can be regarded as somewhat anti-enlightenment, in the sense that these are thinkers that do not support revolution. So the French Revolution is something that created great disorder in their in their perspective, and therefore it was not something that was good for society to progress. These are thinkers that are we will see with Durkheim that he is a sociologist of social order. He wants to understand how is social order maintained and amidst all these transformations that are taking place. However, what also connects them to the Enlightenment and scientific revolution are ideas about positivism. So Saint-Simon is also very much he subscribes to the idea that the scientific method is essential to the study of sociology, and that sociology should use methods from the physical sciences, and through that study lead the way and show us the way for social reform. But reform, not revolution, is what he argued for. Comte, we've spoken about, is the first to use the term sociology, and he also does not, following say Saint-Simon, subscribe to many of the Enlightenment ideas except for the notion that observation forms the basis of knowing, and he also wanted or argued for evolutionary change versus revolutionary change, and reforms are to come through these observations, through these studies, through analysis, but reforms are to inform and assist the process rather than revolutionize or completely change. Auguste Comte also has an evolutionary theory in terms of how society evolves, and in his argument, society goes through 3 different stages of thinking, so the first stage is, he refers to it as the theological stage. This is prior to the 1300s, where all explanations can be explained through religion and through the existence of God. So God created nature and the physical world and the social world. The next stage after theological is the metaphysical. At this stage, the physical laws or nature, the abstract forces of nature, are the causal explanation for all that is going on in the world. This is from 1300 to 1800, following which he says now we are in the evolutionary stage of positivism. And this is where we know about the world and can explain the world using the scientific method. And in that sense, human society has evolved from ascribing everything to a God world, and now we need to look at things and understand processes, especially physical and social processes, through the scientific method. Comte's unit of analysis was the family and society as large, so not so much the individual, and he was very interested in understanding the role of consensus in society. He used the observation, experimentation and comparative methods, and very much influenced the thinking of Emile Durkheim, who was much later. In fact, Emile Durkheim is of the time which is after the passing of Auguste Comte, but Durkheim is also, like Comte and Saint-Simon, searching for social order and what would evolve society in the right direction. Durkheim is also known for legitimizing the discipline of sociology in France. He was politically liberal, but intellectually he was in the same tradition, so many term him conservative, in the sense that he is not looking at contradictions and conflict in society, and in fact is very scared of them, as some argue, and wants to find what is the social glue that holds society together. So remember the Asibaya that Khaldun wrote about, that, I mean, it seems to me that there are some similar ideas here in what Durkheim is also searching for. Like Comte, he is also very influenced by Catholic counter-revolutionaries who are opposing the French Revolution, who are opposing many ideas of the Enlightenment, but he is also a positivist, and so he wants to study sociology using what he calls social fact. He writes one of the first texts on the sociological method, and the unit of analysis he calls as social facts. We will talk about social facts later on when we go deeper into Durkheim, but he is dividing social facts into two kinds, the material and the non-material. The non-material is culture, social institutions like marriage and the family, whereas material are bureaucracy and law, which he doesn't pay as much attention to as he does to social institutions and culture. He is also known for his book on division of labor in society, where he shows that the division of labor in society, contrary to the belief that it would lead to a disintegration, actually acts as a glue for society because it makes people more interdependent on each other. All right, I think we will go more into Durkheim as we progress. Let me now move to the German sociological tradition. And start with Karl Marx. Karl Marx at this time in his lifetime is on the fringes of sociology. He is not as well known as Weber and Durkheim, or as let's not say as well known. He is not considered, like, he doesn't have as much support in his analysis and his theories as do Weber and Durkheim in their times. Nevertheless, Marx, as we will see in all the other lectures, proves to be a very, very important and powerful sociological thinker, very much more relevant in today's times, where the contradictions within capitalism have become all the more apparent. So what were his influences within the German sociological tradition? Karl Marx is influenced and he went to university in Berlin, both by the German sociological thinkers and by political economists in the English sociological thought, which we will talk about very soon in this lecture. So one of his primary influences is Hegel, and Hegel in his time was, I mean, it's very difficult to estimate the amount of influence, in fact, Hegel had about with the range of scholars in Germany at the time, in the second quarter of the 19th century. As Marx is studying, there is the group of old Hegels and the group of young Hegels. Old Hegelian scholars basically take Hegel at his word and are very interested in exploring more of Hegelian thought. Young Hegelian scholars are drawing from Hegelian methods or ideas, but are also critical of them. And Marx is exposed to both. Now, Hegel has two concepts that are associated with him. One is dialectics and the other is the notion of idealism. Dialectics is both a method of studying and thinking, and it is an image of the world. In both these contexts, as a method of thinking and as an image of the world, it is basically emphasizing processes, it is emphasizing movement, relations, conflicts, contradictions, and is is basically different from, as we will see when I introduce other scholars, from the more Kantian view, which is somewhat more linear and is more focused on cause and effect. Here it is a interrelation, it is one builds on the other, and it's a process. It's that ongoing process in terms of the way society is looked at and in terms of the way the method progresses that is central to Hegelian thought. The other notion that Hegel is associated with is idealism, and that is the importance of mind and mental products. Hegel really, basically for him, it is the definition of the social world that is more important than the social world itself. It's like, and he basically also calls it the spirit of society. The spirit of society will remain, or remains. Our notions of the world remains, whether the world remains or not, is something that might characterize Hegelian idea. He's also an evolutionary thinker, and his evolutionary thinking goes at the level of consciousness. So in the early stages, human beings sense the world and know about the world through through a very sensory process. Then they become conscious of that sensory world, and through that consciousness come to self-knowledge. Through that self-knowledge, they realize that they can be more than what they are, and then there is a contradiction that emerges, which also then leads to a realization that the ultimate fulfillment of humanity lies in the development of society as a whole, and they start to see their role in the larger scheme of things. So this is this kind of an idea of Hegel of looking at evolution at the level of consciousness is central to Hegelian way of thinking. Hegel comes to Marx through Feuerbach, and Feuerbach is a strong materialist. Even as he draws from Hegel, he opposes Hegel in the sense that he feels that Hegel focuses too much on ideas and not enough on the real material world. So Feuerbach is focusing on the material reality of human beings, on what can be referred to as materialist philosophy, and he explains that through his understanding of religion. He says humans invented the God through a mental process. So God is in that mental process, God becomes that who is almighty, that who is all powerful, is perfect, is holy, and in this construction humans construct themselves as weak, as powerless, as imperfect. And he says this is the wrong way to think about the world and about religion, because it does not give human beings any power for any change, and that this kind of religion must be overcome. So these are some of the ideas that are coming to the young Karl Marx, who then, as we will see in our next slide, takes from political economy of the English sociological tradition and develops his theory of the capital. All right. let me move to the next slide here. The other tradition that is very dominant, in fact more than the Marxist ideas and Hegelian ideas, is that of Kant. And Kant also is basically looking at the world through a thought process. And what he does is that there is a real world which we cannot know, is what he is arguing. But we can know it through observation, and what we know is what we observe, and that there are forms that we can comprehend through this thought process. So his emphasis on form makes his understanding of the world much more static than what a Hegelian understanding of process gave us. And the thinkers that I have up here, Weber, George Simmel, are basically influenced by Immanuel Kant's understanding of the world. Let's start with Weber here. Weber is also very much influenced by Nietzsche, and particularly his emphasis on Nietzsche's emphasis on the hero, because Weber is very much, he's apart from being a scholar of understanding how ideas influence economy, he's also a scholar of bureaucracy and the state, and he's arguing for individuals to be able to stand up to this rigid bureaucratization or the authoritative state. And these ideas are coming from a Nietzsche influence. His other ideas, like I said, are coming from Kant. Weber rejects the idea that Marx had, how the material world basically shapes ideas, and in fact he inverted it in its head and argues also how ideas are autonomous things that actually help shape the economy. In some ways, in this way he disagrees with Marx. In another way, he's also, like Marx, talking about social stratification, although he's expanding again social stratification as just that exists between economic classes to also include how social stratification happens through power and privilege. So he has, in fact, that's why I've put that arrow up here on the slide, because I want to show that even as he is not quite read Marx's writing, because they come out after his death, but he's reading other Marxists, and some of his work can be seen as a dialogue with those ideas. Weber is also known for conducting detailed historical studies. He is very influential in the way sociology develops in Germany, and along with George Simmel, who I have up here, he forms the German Sociological Society. So going on to George Simmel, Simmel is very influential in the German sociological tradition, but we also know him for shaping the American sociological tradition, specifically the Chicago School at the University of Chicago. It is said that Robert Park from the University of Chicago came to Germany and heard one of George Simmel's lectures and was heavily influenced, and so takes back some of these ideas, usually referred to as symbolic interactionism, back to the United States with him. Simmel is different from both Marx and Weber in the scale at which he studies. His emphasis is on individual interactions and relations. So he is focusing on, he in fact does this forms of interaction and types of interaction. So forms of interaction can be conflict or friendship. These are different forms of, he classified these different forms of interaction, and then they could be types of, he wrote a lot of these small booklets about different types of interactions, such as those with a stranger, with a miser, with a prostitute, with a spendthrift. And then these small texts that were easy to read as opposed to the voluminous writings of Weber and Marx, and became very popular in the United States in order to spearhead a whole direction of sociological thinking that we refer to as symbolic interactionism. Well, this work in some ways, even though it becomes much more important and significant in the way sociology develops, somehow overshadows his other work on the philosophy of money. He is interested in the emergence of money in the world, and specifically money as something that becomes predominant and separate from the individual. Here he's also known for talking about or writing about the difference between what he terms as the dyad and the triad, and 2 people and 3 people, and the transformation in social relations that happen when the 2 becomes a 3. When it is 3, for example, he writes, and there is conflict between the 2, a mediation process can happen, or 2 can gang up and work to oppress the 3rd. So there are several social relations that are possible when the number becomes more than 2. Predominantly, he is very interested in understanding the role of society in dominating the individual. So that's the interrelation. His focus has been on the individual, but individual in relation to society, which is why he is very significant in the discipline of sociology. All right, I will move to the English sociological tradition now. Well, one second, I forgot to mention this, but around this time there is also Sigmund Freud, who is quite a towering figure in German psychoanalytic traditions, but I have put him up here because he was also very influential to sociologists, particularly the work of Herbert Marcuse and other scholars from the Frankfurt School that we will study later on in a few of the lectures. All right, so the English sociological tradition. The English sociological tradition is divided into 2 strands, one of which is the political economy strand, that is largely focusing on the relationship of the state and economy, and the social evolutionary strand, which is looking at how society evolves. And these 2 strands kind of function independently, and the social evolutionary thinkers don't quite agree with a lot of what Karl Marx is writing about. So Karl Marx and that lineage ends up becoming what we often refer to as conflict theory, and the social evolutionary thinkers end up becoming what we often refer to as structural functionalism. So they are interested in understanding the functions of the divisions of labor, for example, and not so much the contradictions inherent. The political economy strand is very interested in the market, and in fact most of the thinkers, we know Adam Smith, for example, is famous for having coined the term the invisible hand, and a lot of other political economic thinkers of the time, except for Marx, think of market as a good thing, market as a source of cohesion for society, market as something that relies on voluntary cooperation, market as something that can lead to social progress. So these are the ideas dominant, and they think that the state can actually help with progressing through the market, and that their role as social scientists then is to do studies that can enable a better understanding of the market in order to help it become better. So there is a lot of statistics, there is a lot of gathering of data at the individual level that is then collated to form collective categories and then therefore do inferences. So that's largely where political economy in the English sociological tradition that is heading. Now Marx takes an issue with that. He does not agree with that kind of sociology because he argues that they do not see the contradictions inherent within capitalism. And while he takes several, the idea that labor is the source of all value, he takes from Adam Smith, but he also challenges many of the political economy ideas of his times in order to build his theory on capital, which we will study in the next week. Now the other strand of English sociological tradition actually is in the lineage of Auguste Comte, Saint-Simon, Auguste Comte, but comes much later when Harriet Martineau translates Comte's work into English and it becomes accessible to those over there. And Herbert Spencer, again a very big figure in English sociology, who develops the society, the sociological society in England, and is very is a towering figure of English sociology. He also influences Emile Durkheim's thought, and he also is basically talking about voluntary cooperation and voluntary contract, and he says what holds society together is a strong common morality. Now Spencer is writing around the same time as Charles Darwin and is known for having coined the term survival of the fittest. He, drawing from biology, looks at society as an organism, like a biological organism that has different parts that are interdependent on each other. An idea that Emile Durkheim will also talk about in his work. From Herbert Spencer, Charles Darwin writes about his natural selection about 8 years after Spencer has written about survival of the fittest. He is also a controversial figure because he argues that states and societies evolve in terms of their size and in terms of their complexity, and the fit ones should survive, and the weak ones basically disintegrate and do not stay. So that becomes somewhat of a controversial view even in his time. The other way he brings in evolutionary thinking is by arguing that the way capitalism and industrial world is developing, we are moving away from a militarized society to an industrial society. So that's the evolution. And while a militarized society was needed, it was functional in its time, and it played a role, let's say, towards expansion and cohesion. It no longer serves that function, and the industrial society relies on voluntary contracts. It relies on more cooperation and is held together by shared moral roles of conduct. So the other person whom I mentioned quite briefly, Harriet Martineau, she's both. She kind of lies in the middle of political economy and social evolution. She's known largely for having translated Auguste Comte, but her illustrations in political economy are very well written short novels on various themes related to production, related to consumption, exchange, different aspects of political economy. She is also situated as a Unitarian Christian and is drawing from utilitarian philosophy. So her larger project has been to look at human happiness and how that can only unfold through freedom. And that the role of sociology or the social sciences should be to move towards human happiness, the larger human happiness through social reform. Another very important contribution of Harriet Martineau is that she writes another very important text on the sociological method. She writes about how to observe morals and manners, and she distinguishes between morals as a set of values and manners as a set of behaviors. And largely in this method, what she is wanting to study is how much the behaviors and the actions and the manners, how much do they reflect the values that the society upholds. So that's why she sets up this almost a dialectic between morals and manners. Then her important text, Society in America. I compared Tocqueville and Martineau's writings on their studies in America in one of my early lectures. She studies the United States over 2 years again on the basis of American values and American behaviors, and she criticizes American democracy as not being able to uphold its values because it discriminates against women, against African Americans, and therefore is not able to live up to its values. All right, so my last slide of today, I want to focus briefly, and we will go more in detail in the course of lectures, on what is happening in India around that time and who are the sociological thinkers who are commenting on sociology, and sociology here as separate from the religious or the metaphysical view of the world, or the spiritual view of the world, as something that is analytical which holds society as a unit of analysis. I want to mention Pandita Ramabai in 1858 to 1922, and she is very interested in understanding the status of women in Indian society. L.K. Iyer, not a trained sociologist, but one of the central figures in bringing what is often what I talked about in the terms of the English sociological method, that of surveys, that of large amounts of statistical data, and he was in fact commissioned by the Diwan of Cochin to conduct an ethnographic survey of the region, and he conducts one of the first surveys, ethnographic surveys, followed by, there were several others that the Britishers then conducted subsequently in India. Sarath Chandra Roy was a lawyer by training, and then at some point in his life he moves to Ranchi. There he comes face to face with tribal customs and tribal laws, and is compelled to study them to see how these traditions and customs and laws influence social life in tribal societies. So he is very much known for his studies of the Chota Nagpur area, now Jharkhand. Then important to mention is Binoy Sarkar, one of the first theorists, you can say, educated in politics and sociology, and he is known for bringing in several Indian texts into his understanding of sociology, and he proposed the idea of a Hindu sociology. While he is often referred to as a nationalist and somewhat more conservative, but it is also, I want to mention that his view of India was that of a religion or a society where different religions can coexist. I thought that important to mention here. He also is central to forming sociological societies and several other institutions in Bengal. Next we come to Ghurye, and he was a professor of sociology at the University of Bombay, and in fact a whole tradition of sociologists emerge as his students. Prominent, he's a scholar of caste and race. He does comparative analysis of what is, how the structure, the social stratification that exists within caste societies and the functional role that they play. One of his students, Iravati Karve, took those methods. She goes to Germany to study sociology, something quite unprecedented in her times, and comes back, challenges her PhD supervisor in Germany, and who on the basis of linguistic and ethnographic surveys was attempting to argue that there are race hierarchies. She challenges that, and she also does several kinship studies that form yet another trajectory in the way Indian sociological thinking then moves. D.P. Mukherjee is known for his study of tradition and change, and he is very interested in how the social science, how societies transform and how traditions are reshaped in that process, what stays and what changes. A.R. Desai, of this list perhaps the only Marxist scholar very much known for his study of relationship of state and society, particularly the role of welfare state. And he gives a theory of that critiques the welfare state, but from a Marxist perspective, because he's also very involved politically. He's a member of the Communist Party of his time in India. He's very involved with peasant struggles, and in his theory and understanding of welfare state, it is failing to deliver that which it promises. And then M.N. Srinivasan introduces yet another very important trajectory in Indian sociological thought, that of village studies. Now, some of these scholars we will come back to in our future lectures, but for today I want to leave you with this understanding of what can be called as a family tree of these various ways in which sociologists and sociological thinkers have explained the world. And we will carry this forward. Even as I speak about some prominent theorists, I will try to again reiterate what their influences were and how that shaped how they think about our social world. Thank you.